Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 1, What is Social Work? So let's get started. Okay. So just a little bit of a note about recording lectures. To help you mediate how much bandwidth you use, I'm going to be breaking up my lectures into shorter videos that will also kind of help you drop in and out as you need to go back and review certain parts but not others, that sort of thing. So this particular lecture is 24 slides long, so we will probably pause and do a new video every 6 or so slides. Let's just kind of see how that goes. It is sort of my goal to have them not be really any longer than 15 minutes each, but we'll see. Okay, Chapter 1, what is social work? So first, just a little note about the PowerPoints. So the book publisher provided very basic PowerPoints based on the chapters. I've modified them. Where I've added things, I have made it blue. Any graphic that you see is something that I've added. There is not a single graphic in any of the PowerPoints that they provided. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about why some of the things are blue and some of them are not. Okay. Oops. Okay. So social workers. Social workers in general. Okay. Social workers as a profession, sorry, I skipped one slide. It's a very broad field, and it's divided into different levels of practice, and we're going to talk about this a lot. So it's kind of important to understand the different levels of practice. And micro practice is really what you probably think of when you think of social work. It's about working together with individuals. And then macro practice is the other end of the spectrum completely, which is really about changing the larger environment. So this is a little bit like policy work. And, if you decide to become a consultant, which is work that I've done, and then you are creating programs that reach lots of people, that's macro practice. If you become a politician, that's macro practice. Meso practice is somewhere in between, so that's working with families, small groups, that sort of thing. So, if you say go into child welfare, that's meso practice because you are working with the entire family. Okay. Why we're having trouble with that. Okay, so who are social workers? Social workers have to hold a bachelor's or a master's from a school of social work. So what does that mean for you? You are working on your associate's degree right now, and if you are trying to get your associate's in social work, that is great. Unfortunately, you cannot call yourself a social worker. It is a protected name. You can't call yourself a social worker like on your business cards or when you're creating your resume or whatever until you have that bachelor's or master's. So that's important to remember. That doesn't mean that you don't still have the degree. You do. It's just that particular job title, that particular professional title is protected. Just like, for example, veterinarian is protected. Okay, so let's see. You have, as a social worker, when you have your bachelor's or your master's, there are requirements for the state. If you decide to become licensed, that's a different kettle of conversation. But remember that being a social worker and becoming a social worker, just like any other profession, starts with education. And that's what we're doing now. Okay, so there is a professional organization. The National Association of Social Workers has a chapter in every single state. The one in California, that I've included the link there. The goal is to provide sort of a unitary um, structure for social workers about how social workers should behave and what the goals of the profession is, that sort of thing. It is not a union. Lots of social workers are in unions for sure, but the professional organization and the union are two different things. Okay, so I've included here the mission and the purpose. I pulled these off of the California site, but you know, it's basically the same thing. I just want to make sure that you understand what the mission and the purpose really is of the professional organization. And basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to, you know, make sure that our profession is high quality and very effective, and to make sure that our society is going the right direction. It's getting better with time instead of worse with time. And we want to make sure that as we move forward as social workers, we are promoting the highest of professional standards. Okay. Okay. So the person and environment perspective, this is also something you're going to hear a lot. And basically the bottom line of person and environment is that everybody exists in a context. There is no such thing as somebody who is completely independent of the environment around them, of the other people around them. That's just not a thing. You know, we are all inside some sort of environment. It might be complex, it might be simple, it might be supportive, it might not be supportive. It could be all sorts of things. But the point is that we all exist in this context. And if we do not pay attention to that context when we're working with folks, the problem becomes that the environment that they're in is often stronger than, you know, the hour a week that you spend with them, or, you know, their internal drive to grow or change or uh, create new patterns, right? So if we don't work on modifying that environment or using that environment and what's strong in it to help us make changes, we are often not going to be successful. Okay. So there are a lot of theories in social work. If you've taken any science classes or social work classes or psychology classes before, you are familiar with what a theory is. And basically what it does is it attempts to explain why something is the way that it is, and it has to be testable. There are a few things that I want to talk about with regards to theories that are important and relevant to our class, which is that theories can be proven wrong, but it is very difficult to prove them correct, right? So it's easy to say, like, I have a theory that, you know, the sky is green. Okay, well, you can look up into the sky and you can see that it's blue, right? So you can prove that theory wrong, but you can't have a very hard time proving that the sky is never green, right? So like it becomes very difficult to prove that. So that's something to understand about theories. And when you can prove a theory right, it becomes, in science and social work and psychology and all the other fields that use theories, it becomes a law. And you don't hear that a lot. There's not a lot of laws in science. So another thing about theories is that theories change over time. They don't necessarily, those changes don't not necessarily invalidate the earlier conceptualization of what that theory is. It just refines it. So, I mean, it doesn't have to refine it. It can completely invalidate the earlier concept. But the point is that as time goes on, theories can become narrower and narrower and more specific, more accurate to the information as more information becomes available. So, it's not that you know changing a concept of something means that theories are garbage. That's not what that means at all. What it means is that science is an evolving practice, and that as we learn more information, we have to modify our beliefs about how things work. So, the bottom line here is don't be too devoted to one conceptualization of how something works, because as we gather more information about that thing, our concepts have to change by necessity. The last thing is multiple theories can explain the same phenomenon. So, there are lots of ways to look at a lot of situations, and some things can only be explained by one theory, fine, but there are many, many, many situations, especially with human beings who are very complex, where multiple theories can explain what's going on just as well as each other. And sometimes they are compatible and they work together, and sometimes it's like, well, both of these theories explain the situation, and we need to spend a little more time to figure out which one is the one that is actually true, right? Okay. So why do social workers use theories? Why are we talking about this right now? The reason why we're talking about this right now is that theories help us explain behavior in social relationships, and so they help us understand what kind of interventions should be the most successful, right? So, oops, sorry. So the idea is that without some sort of um, overarching concept of what's going on, it's very difficult to um, to know what to do, right? And we're just sort of grabbing at sticks in the dark. So it's important to kind of understand what is out there to explain a particular phenomenon that you might be seeing, so that you kind of know what direction to head with it. I'm sure that makes sense. Okay, so this is one of my very favorite social work theories, general systems theory. So just like we were talking about the different levels of practice, systems theory explains how various elements work together to make up the whole, right? So we're interested in systems, how the interaction between part A and part B, comes together to cause, effect C, and that there are a lot of different elements that come together to create a situation, and that shape up, how a life looks and how it can be affected, right? So if we want to intervene and make some sort of change, we need to kind of understand what that whole picture is, because different parts of that situation can help us improve what's going on, or it can work against us. Okay, so this is going to be, I think, the last slide for this first part of the lecture. This is a visualization of what we were just talking about. You should know what these systems are, because we're going to talk about this a lot, and also it will come up in your work for this week. Ecological systems framework builds on systems theory. So, it's basically a more specific version of what we were just talking about on that last slide. Bronfenbrenner is the researcher who came up with this particular visualization and concept. And basically, what we're talking about here is that you're in the middle, you are the individual, and then your microsystem are are the people, and to some extent, like the institutions are right directly around you. So we're talking about your friends, your family, where you work, your church if you go to church, the neighborhood in which you live. It's the stuff that you interact with directly every single day. Okay. But then if you think about it, there are levels to all of those things that you don't that kind of have a larger structure to them. So if you think about school as an example of this, so you go to school, well, normal times, you go to school, you go into the classroom, and that is part of your microsystem. The people that you interact with there, the instructor that you interact with there, that's part of your microsystem. But you are also part of the larger school. There might be parts of school you don't even see, right? So CCSF is huge, right? So there's going to be rooms you don't even go into, departments you don't interact with, but they are all part of your mesosystem anyway, right? So same thing if you think about, say, your neighborhood. You might have your favorite restaurant or whatever, but there's a whole lot of other restaurants that are also part of your neighborhood. Again, part of your mesosystem, right? So on the next level, we have the exosystem. So, we're talking here about the economic system, the political system. So, the context that we live within, the educational system in a very kind of broad sense. So, just to take that analogy a little bit further, we're now talking about not CCSF, but also just higher education, right? So on the exosystem level, when we talk about education and we talk about your education, we're talking about college, right? Just colleges in general, and we're talking about, when we talk about government, we're talking about different levels of government, right? But local government, state government, federal government, whatever, all of that stuff is part of the exosystem. And then it gets the macro system is a little more ethereal, so we're talking here about social values, your beliefs, but also the beliefs that are prevalent in the society that you're in. So that's part of the macro system. And then the chronosystem is the dimension of time. And the thing about the chronosystem, you can make this complicated or you can make it simple. And the way to make it simple is to think about, the kind of historical moment that you live in, right? So as I'm recording this in January of 2021, in a couple of days, we will have a new president inaugurated. And the old president will be going out. We are in the middle of a raging pandemic. This is all part of the chronosystem. This is all part of the moment, the historical moment that we are in. So those things are also part of other levels of the system. But think about it in terms of the time, the moment that we're in, right? And if you go back and you talk to your parents, or I talk to my parents, and they talk about, say, Vietnam, that's part of their chrono system. So, think about it that way. All right, so I am going to stop here and do the second part of the video. So hold on, please.